might be important to look at the system of education as a system of formal learning and the system of socialization as a way or the way in which one generation was socialized into the fundamental values and rituals and meaning of life of the community and therefore of the society.
The belief was that you weren't born man or born woman, you were born male or born female. And through the process of passage, then you became male or you became female. The passage was intended to be arduous, rigorous.
They would have had to have gone to the temple and gone through certain rites of passage.
The socialization has to do with becoming an adult, with knowing your roles as an adult.
And the training was both physical, both mental, and both spiritual.
And a lot of this came to rest in the temple, where you had schools in the temple.
The temple itself was not to be worshipped. The people themselves understood that they were the most sacred thing, not the temple.
All the professions were premised upon somebody having completed what is called scribal training. To become a scribe was really to achieve the platform from which other careers took off.
What I also find very interesting and very attractive about the Kushite civilization was that, unlike in Egypt, where it was only the educated classes and the priesthood and so on who could read and write, in Kush they achieved a high level of literacy. That meant that humble people could actually read and write and were encouraged to do so.
In actual fact, I don't think there's any modern equivalent to one of these temples. They were both centres of scholarship, but they were also the centres of religion.
So the custodian, the intellectual custodian, was also a spiritual custodian. Was also the warrior custodian. In times of war, it was they that pulled up their cloth and went to war. It was also they that kept the spirit of that nation alive. It was also they who kept the intellect of that nation alive in books and study. So there was no separation. Kemetian philosophy is so monotheistic. All of it was part of the one science, which is life. This science was not separate from religion. So the science and the religion were combined together.
And it's that understanding that everything is interconnected, which is the spirituality.
Everything in the cosmos, in the universe, is related to everything else. We're all interconnected.
There is an understanding that there is one central energy source, but with different aspects. The aspects are represented by how we call in the Western world gods. But there is never a thinking that there isn't one monotheistic central source or power. There is the understanding, whether you're in Kemet, whether you're in Nubia or in Kush or in any of these kingdoms in the Nile Valley or any of the African kingdoms that follow subsequently, that there is one central source or energy from which everything comes from.
Clearly, they share the same religious beliefs as with the Egyptians, with some additions, so to speak. Some local gods were worshipped, like god Apedemak, a lion god. And you have to remember that lions were common here up until the early 19th century.
These historical sites found here in Africa
are all that's left of the Nubian and Kushite cultures of people who lived all along the Nile Valley.
These ruins are evidence of some of the world's earliest highly developed civilized cultures. These people had an understanding of astrology, medicine, philosophy. They had mapped out the world. They had circumnavigated and understood the planet that they lived on.
We find that the people of the Nile Valley were responsible for developing the first calendar of 365 and a quarter days.
Now, because of the tropical or semi-tropical condition in the Nile Valley, there were clear nights and people could see the stars and the other heavenly bodies. And it is very clear that humanity began to notice patterns. Think about this. How long would it take, for example, for us to understand the movement of the moon?
The moon travels around the Earth every 27.322 days. Because of this, the ancients based their month around a 30-day cycle.
How long will it take for us to work out that the Earth goes around the sun once in every 365.25 days?
The calendar was utilized as late as 4,230 BCE. Now, in order to come to that definitive understanding of how long it takes the Earth to rotate on its orbit around the sun, you have to be able to make celestial observations for at least 1,000 years to identify the patterns, to then correct the patterns, to come up with the most accurate calendar that has ever been used by human beings.
The ancients of the Nile Valley based their year and months around the natural cycles of the universe. Each of their months was connected to an astrological sign, like our zodiac, and so their yearly calendar became a map of the Earth's human, earthly, and heavenly cycles.
And this is where the sense of time, the whole question of the calendar, the year, different months came out of.
So you had groups of people who had time on their hand to observe their environment and then to produce great works that recorded their observations. So you had astronomers.
In terms of astrology, that was always, again, very important to the ancient Egyptians. And when people were born, they would actually have their charts drawn up.
We see water irrigation, we see aqueducts, we see underground heating, swimming pools, we see heated swimming pools.
We had people who studied rocks and minerals, geology.
These very brightly polished ones, that's again a classic Sudanese. I think that particular colour combination, those happen to be the colours of the modern Egyptian flag, but actually it's a very, to me, very Sudanese combination, that clear white with dark and red. Earlier in the history of Kemet, you get a lot of carnelian, the red stone, coming out of Nubia.
Precision drilling, iron smelting, precision iron smelting.
You had people who studied plant cycles, agriculture.
We see papyrus paper, we see glass making, we see stained glass, we see use of gunpowder, not in weaponry, but in religious services and religious rites.
You had people who studied building, how to build structures, what materials are best used to build structures.
This was a great golden age of pyramids, of temples, of writing, scholarship.
We see elements and good deal of evidence, perhaps of electricity.
You had artisans who were responsible for creating great works of arts, sculptures, paintings.
Gold smelting, silver smelting, the creation of refined industries.
These are classic faience beads. This is the colour that most of the material in this tray should look. Faience is simply desert sand, it's quartz sand, but it's ground down and fused at a fairly high temperature, and you add the colour from adding ingredients, so that amazing blue will come from copper filings that have been added in. So there's a very close link between the artists who are producing all of this material and the metal workers, because they're using the filings from the metal workers' floor. So the underpinning of order in Egyptian religious art and in the language is a pedestal. It's a block that looks a bit like kind of a carpenter's plane, something to make things smooth. And the word and language of Kemet is ma'at. Ma'at is smooth, and it's trying to make things on a smooth path. That seems to be the metaphor they use, and Ma'at almost means what is good.
One of the most significant aspects of spirituality in Kemet had to do with the concept of Ma'at. Ma'at represented the ubiquitous powers that flow throughout the universe, that maintain the balance, the harmony, and the order throughout the universe and on planet Earth. Ma'at was represented by a female figure with wings and an ostrich feather. One later came to recognize this figure of a human being with wings as a prototype for angels within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Ma'at was fundamental to the Nile Valley because it was its moral code.
The ancient Kemetians believed, as did the Africans from the south, that when one passed from this existence to another, there was a point of spiritual judging. This spiritual judging was to weigh your heart with a feather. The heart had to measure itself and be balanced against a feather.
And you quite literally get the heart being weighed on scales to see if a person is worthy of going through to the next life.
We can actually still see Nubians wearing the feather of Ma'at, showing their connection to this moral order.
The people and the pharaohs tried to establish and maintain Ma'at. And they didn't have a word for evil, because that's, I think, what people think, good and evil, light and dark, do you know what I mean? But the opposite of Ma'at was Isfet, which was unbalanced.
Ma'at, the feather, would then be weighed against a person's heart. And if your heart is heavy and it tips against the feather, it shows that you have done things to have a heavy heart, meaning you're a guilty person.
The idea of the feather was a representation of the female aspect and also of air, but also of the lightness of being, the idea that your heart was not heavy. We still say it now. My heart is not heavy. My heart was light. I had a light heart, a clean soul.
They declare their innocence by reciting the 42 admonitions of Ma'at, some of which would sound very familiar to Jews and Christians. Those 42 admonitions were: I have not stolen. I have not committed adultery. I have not polluted myself. I have not polluted the land. I have not spoken ill of my neighbor. I have not spoken ill against God. I have not defrauded offerings.